Welcome to Wheelock's Latin, Chapter 19. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at the passive voice perfect system for all conjugations. We'll also take a continuing look at synopsis for what we have thus far on verb forms, and we'll be looking at interrogative pronouns and adjectives. So let's do a quick review of what voice is. If you will remember, we've talked about voice in grammar. Verbs have two voices. They have active voice and passive voice. In sentences with verbs in the active voice, the subject is doing the action of the verb. In sentences with verbs in the passive voice, the subject is being acted upon. Let's look at a couple of examples so that we can sort of put this into practice here. Civitas viros laudat. Laudat, of course, is an active verb, indicative. And we haven't really talked about indicative mood yet versus subjunctive mood. That's coming up in the next semester. But here we have active voice, indicative mood is this present tense, third person singular. And the translation for this is, the state praises its heroes. Civitas is our subject, nominative singular. Laudat again is our active verb. And viros, translated here as heroes, is accusative plural. This is the direct object. So the state praises its heroes. Now, by contrast, here is a sentence with the passive verb. Civitas a viros laudatur. Here, laudatur is the passive verb. You notice it's got the tur, the ter ending. Aris ter, mer mini inter. Those are your present tense passive endings that we learned in the last chapter. So civitas a viros laudatur. Here's translation. Civitas is the subject, the state. And laudatur, because it's a passive verb, it's reflecting the fact that the subject is being acted upon. So the state is being praised. The state is being praised, a viros, by its heroes. So this is the difference between an active verb and a passive verb. Now, just as a quick review of the verb forms that we have learned thus far in both the active and passive voice. Now, here is the paradigm verb laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. And you can see the active present system and perfect system across the top here. Laudo, laudabam, laudo, laudabam, laudabo, laudavi, laudaram, laudawaro. And in the passive voice, which we most recently learned in the present system, laudor, laudabar, and laudabor. And this week, in this current chapter, we'll be learning the rest of these passive forms in the perfect system: perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. So let's take a look at these forms. All right, the passive perfect verb is formed by adding the passive participle, which is the fourth principal part, plus some form of the word sum. And here's what this looks like. So if you remember using, again, laudo, our paradigm verb for first conjugation verbs, laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum, or laudatus aum, we're going to take that fourth principal part and we'll use that in perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect, but to each of these we will add some form of sum. So for the perfect tense, we add sum es est, sumus estis sunt, to the fourth principal part. And in the pluperfect, we will add oram, oras, orat, oramus, oratus, orant. And to the future perfect tense, we will add aro, oris, orit, oremus, oritis, orunt. So all these forms of sum you've already learned. So all we're going to do is add this to the fourth principal part. There we go. Let's look at the paradigm verbs once again. Here we got laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum, monoo, monere, monoi, monatum. We'll look at third, fourth, and third io in just a minute. All of what we're going to be talking about in this chapter applies to all of these conjugations. It doesn't just work for first and second. So let me go ahead and state that we'll be looking at examples of laudo and monoo, but it applies to all the conjugations, which makes these forms of the verb very handy because you don't have to learn one thing for first and second and something different for third, fourth, and third io. So remember, we use the second principal part here for the active present system. For the active perfect system, and that was way too fast. I didn't intend for that to go away that quick. We use the third principal part. And then so finally here, For the passive perfect system, we use the fourth principal part, laudatum and monotum. Now, in actuality, these forms are really laudatus aum. It's a masculine, feminine, neuter form. Same thing with monotum. It's monotus aum, but we'll look into that in a little bit more detail later. So here's a little chart that I throw together for my students to help them remember which principal part is used for which system and which voice. If it's the present system, both active and passive, it uses the second principal part. If it is the active perfect system, we use the third principal part. And if it is the passive perfect system, we use the fourth principal part. So this will kind of help you if you keep this chart in mind, 2, 2, 3, 4, going top to bottom and then left to right. That helps to remember which principal part to use when forming these verbs. So let's take a look at laudatus aum. Excuse me, laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum, our paradigm verbs. So here we have in the perfect system, perfect tense, laudatus aum plus sum. And in the second person singular, laudatus aum est, laudatus aum est. Now notice here, when we move into plural, we have to use the plural forms of laudatus aum. So that's masculine nominative singular for laudatus. So the masculine nominative plural would be laudati. And for the feminine nominative singular, it's laudata. And in the feminine nominative plural, it's laudatai, A-E. And then the neuter, of course, is laudatum. And in the plural, it's laudata. So we have to use the plural forms when we move to the plural side of the chart here. And then we add sumus, the first person plural of sum, and then laudati ia estis and laudati ia sunt. And this is translated, it could be translated two ways. I was praised, or I have been praised. That would be a sufficient way to translate as well. You were praised, you have been praised, he, she, it was praised, he, she, it has been praised, we were praised, you all were praised, and they were praised, etc. Now for the pluperfect, we're going to take the laudatus aum again and add arama ras erat. And the plural, we take the laudati ia forms, the plural forms here, and we add oramus eratis erant. Translation is had. Had is the key helping verb translation to see pluperfect. I had been praised. You had been praised. He had been praised. We had been praised. You all had been praised. They had been praised. So anytime you see had in here, this is going to be pluperfect. And for the future perfect, finally, again, laudatus aum plus aro, aris, arit. And in the plural, laudati ia, aremus, aritis, arunt. Translations, I will have been praised. You will have been praised. He, she, it will have been praised. We will have been praised. You all will have been praised. And they will have been praised. So that is the passive perfect system for first conjugation verbs. And the good news is all verb forms are going to function the exact same way. And nota bene, the ending, we've already mentioned this already, but the ending of the participle must agree with the subject in gender, case, and number, while the form of sum will determine the tense, person, and number. So I guess that's not the note that I said we'd already said this before, but it's along the same lines. The idea here is that if the subject is masculine and it is nominative and it is singular, which of course it will be nominative, then we're going to have laudatus sum. And if the subject is feminine in the nominative singular, we'll have laudata sum, and if it's neuter, it would be laudatum sum, etc. So it's got to agree in case, number, and gender. It's kind of acting like a predicate adjective in this sense. Now, here is the chart for monoo, monere, monoi, monotum. I'm not going to run through these forms, but it's the exact same pattern. Take the fourth principal part, the participle, monotus aum, and add sum, or aram, or aro, depending on which tense you're looking for. And again, nota bene, third, fourth, and third io verbs all use this exact same format, so we don't have to learn anything additional here. Now, let's look at this in a real form here. Let's look at sentences. Actor libertatus est. Now, libertatus est is the passive perfect third person singular form. But notice because it has a us at the end of laudatus, it is masculine nominative singular. And that's because the person it's referring to is actor, which is masculine nominative singular. The translation here is the author was being freed. Or you could say the author has been freed. either one of those are appropriate translations. So it's got to agree in case, number, and gender with the word that it's referring to, and in this case, it's actor. It'll always be the subject. Puellae libertatii erant. Those colors are kind of hard to read, aren't they? The translation here is the girls, puellae, had been freed. Notice we have erant, aramarasarat, aramarasarat, erant. So this is the pluperfect form, passive, pluperfect, third person plural. And consequently, since puellae is plural, we had to use the and it's feminine, by the way. So we had to use the feminine nominative plural form libertatii. AE here is the feminine nominative plural ending. The girls had been freed. Now let's look at one in future perfect. Carmina laudata erunt. The poems Carmina will have been praised. So here we have ero, eris, erit, erimis, eritis, erunt. This is the passive future perfect third person plural form. And because Carmina is nominative neuter plural, we had to use the nominative neuter form, a plural form of laudata erunt. And I want you to get the idea that laudata and erunt function as a unit. The verb plus the form of sum act as a unit itself. If you're not careful, you'll think that erunt is the verb and laudata is some sort of like a predicate adjective, like you'll treat them separately. And if that is the case, if you do that, let's go back to that first example, actor libertatus est. If you were to treat that as the verb est by itself, then the translation you would come up with is the author is, and then being freed, libertatus. Again, that participle form here. The problem with that is this is not present tense. This is perfect tense, which means it's action that's happening in the past. The author was being freed. So you need to always make sure that you are not translating these as separate forms, but as one entity, libertatus est, not libertatus separate from est. The author was being freed. So let's look at a synopsis of what these verb forms look like and remind you that at this point we have learned about 72 forms of verbs. And so there might be times I ask you, rather than conjugate all 72 forms, I ask you to give me a synopsis, which is an abbreviated form. So here is an example of all of the forms at this point of laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. That's quite a few forms there. And this would be the synopsis. For example, if I asked you for first person plural across active and passive voice, all 6 tenses, it would be laudamus, laudabamus, laudabimus. In the passive present, it's laudamer, laudabamer, laudabimer. In the perfect active, it's laudawemus, laudaeramus, laudaerimus. And in the passive perfect system, laudati ia sumus, laudati ia eramus, laudati ia remus. That would again be first person plural. I won't go through the second one, but you can see that's third person singular. All right, so take the time to practice maybe a couple of conjugating these verbs in perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect passive, and just kind of nail down how these are formed. Now, the second part of our lesson today deals with the interrogative pronouns and adjectives. So let's look at interrogative pronouns first. The interrogative pronoun, who, which, what, notice the question mark, asks for the identity of a person or thing. It is identical in form in Latin to the relative pronoun, which you've already learned. Now there's a couple of exceptions here. Masculine and feminine singular are going to be exact same forms, so that's nice. And then, of course, the nominative singular forms are unique, quis, quid, rather than qui, quod. Now let's go ahead and look at our chart here for the interrogative pronoun. Now, by a little bit of review, if you remember our relative pronoun, which was simply who, which, what, or that, it's qui, qui, quod, quis, 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 qui, 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 quim, quim, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo, etc. And the plural forms were qui, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus, etc. Now here, the chart is basically the exact same thing which you learned previously. The differences here are nominative singular. Instead of qui for masculine, it's quis. And in neuter, instead of quod, it's quid. And then masculine and feminine have the exact same form. So those are condensed into one column. So we're going to run through here. Quis, quid. Quis, quis. There we go. Qui, qui. Quim, quid. And then quo, quo. In the plural, of course, we just simply take the e, orum, is, os, is, etc. endings and add it to the QU stem, giving us qui, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus, quae, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus, and quae, quorum, quibus, quae, quibus. So these verb forms, excuse me, not verb forms, these interrogative pronoun forms are nearly identical to forms you've already learned. You just need to learn the nominative singular, quis, quid, and know that masculine and feminine are in the same form. Now, well, how does this translate? Well, it basically translates the exact same way as the relative pronoun, who, which, or what. But in this case, it's interrogative, so it's asking a question. We'll look at some examples here in just a minute. All right, here we go. Quid vides. We have the interrogative pronoun, accusative singular. This is neuter, accusative singular, quid vides. And the translation is, what do you see? Vides is the active second person singular verb. You see, and quid is what? It's the object of the seeing. What do you see? You could say it the other way around. You see what? But since it's a question, you say, what do you see? All right. Let's look at quis consilium habet. The interrogative pronoun here is quis. It is the nominative singular form. And the translation is, who habet has consilium a plan. Who has a plan? So quis here is the subject, and the first example, quid, was the direct object. Just diagramming these out so you can see how they fit in a diagram here. The subject is attached to the verb vides, second person singular, so it's you see, and the direct object is quid. All right, here is the second sentence. Quis is our subject, habet is our verb, and consilium is our direct object. All right, what about interrogative adjectives? All right, what is an interrogative adjective? Well, an interrogative adjective, here we go, is also who, which, or what, but this time it's an adjective, not a pronoun, and it's basically asking for more specific identification about a person or a thing. It is identical to the relative pronoun in every form. Oh, that's good. So here's the chart. Here's this is not only the relative pronoun, but here this is the interrogative adjective, and the translation again is who, which, or what, again with the question mark. So again, we have qui, quae, quod, quis, quis, quis. It's not going to advance on its own. There we go. And the dative qui, qui, accusative quim, quam, quod, ablative quo, qua, quo. And again, the plural forms here, qui, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus, quae, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus, and the neuter quae, quorum, quibus, quae, quibus. So when you see these forms, you have to ask yourself, are they the relative pronoun? Are they the interrogative pronoun? Are they the interrogative adjective? Well, we'll look here in just a minute and see how you distinguish the difference. But let's look at a couple of examples here. Quod signum vides. Quod is our interrogative adjective. It's accusative singular. And the translation here, vides, you see, quod signum, what sign? And of course, because it's a question, you say, what sign do you see? Quod signum is our direct object. We'll look at a diagram of this in just a minute. Here's another example, quae femina consilium habet. And quae is, there it is, quae is our interrogative adjective, nominative singular. This is feminine because it is describing femina. It has to agree in case, number, and gender with the word woman here. So it's nominative, feminine, and singular. Which woman, habet, has a plan, consilium. Which woman has a plan? Now here's how we diagram this. Again, vides is our verb, subject is attached with the ending s, u, c, signum is our direct object. Quod is the adjective that's describing signum, and for that reason it's neuter, accusative, and singular. All right, and here we have femina is our subject, habet is our verb, consilium our direct object, but here we have quae, which is describing femina. It's our adjective, our interrogative adjective. So now that we've looked at a couple of uses or examples of the interrogative pronoun and interrogative adjective, how do we tell the difference between these two forms and the relative pronoun, which basically all look alike? Well, here's how we tell the difference between them. If it's an interrogative pronoun, it's asking for the identity of a person or thing. Notice it's asking, interrogative, from the Latin word rogo, rogari, rogavi, rogatum, meaning to ask. So it's the it's a question. It's asking for the identity of a person or thing. It does not have an antecedent. Unlike the relative pronoun, which will require an antecedent because it's in a secondary clause as an antecedent in the main sentence, this does not. It's just simply a pronoun. And so it's a part of a regular sentence, and it's being used as all pronouns in place of a noun. And of course, since it's a question, it'll have a question mark. So if you see a question mark, it's going to be either the interrogative pronoun or the interrogative adjective. You can see in the second one here, interrogative adjective. It's also asking for specific information of a person or thing. So it's also asking. Notice that third bullet point, it has a question. So if you see a question mark, it's interrogative of some kind, either a pronoun or adjective. The other key thing about an interrogative adjective is that it precedes a noun that agrees with in case, number, and gender. So it will be basically describing, because it's an adjective, like all adjectives, it's going to be attached to another word that's in the same case, number, and gender that it's describing. Now, the relative pronoun, as you remember, introduces a subordinate clause. So it'll be a part of a clause with its own verb. So when you see that, it is neither the interrogative pronoun nor the interrogative adjective. This is the relative pronoun, and it's going to have its own antecedent in the main sentence, and it is not a question. So that's how you tell the difference. Let's look at a couple of examples here. This is the interrogative pronoun. Quis librum tibi dedit. Quis is who? Remember, quis quid. Okay, this is the interrogative pronoun, nominative singular, masculine or feminine. So quis librum. Librum here is book. Tibi is to you, and dedit he gave. So who gave the book to you? The word who here stands on its own. This is the subject of the sentence. Librum, however, is the direct object, and that's why it's accusative singular. And tibi, of course, is your indirect object. Who gave the book to you? Now let's compare. Let's diagram it first. Quis is your subject, dedit the verb, librum direct object, and here is the indirect object, tibi. All right. Now, quis, of course, is the interrogative pronoun. Now, let's compare this to an example of an interrogative adjective. Quim librum tibi dedit. Quim here is accusative singular and masculine, and librum is also masculine accusative singular, so they go together. Quim is an adjective modifying librum, book. Tibi, to you, and dedit, he gave. So which book did he give to you? So here's how we would diagram that out. Subject is a part of the verb, dedit, third person singular, he gave. Librum, the book, that's the direct object. Tibi, to you, indirect object. And here we have quim is our interrogative adjective modifying librum, agreeing in case, number, and gender with librum. And then, of course, the relative pronoun. Where, qui librum tibi dedit, te laudavit. Where's the man? And the rest of that sentence, if we skip over the relative clause, is te laudavit, the man praised you. But we've got a relative clause here, qui librum tibi dedit, and it's who gave the book to you. Qui dedit, he gave. Librum, the book, tibi, to you. We diagram it, it looks like this. Here's the main sentence, where laudavit te, subject, verb, direct object. And now we have our relative clause. Here we go. We got qui is our subject, dedit is the verb, librum is the direct object of the relative clause, tibi, of course, your indirect object. And then, here we go, relative clause. We're going to attach these two. Qui, its antecedent is where, and it is the relative pronoun. Qui is the relative pronoun. Needing to agree in gender and number with its antecedent, in this case, masculine singular, but because it functions as the subject, it is nominative. So that's why it sits there in the subject space. All right, we'll look at more at this in class this week. Don't forget to study your vocabulary. We will have a quiz later.